Welcome
Okay.
everybody to New Books in Daoist Studies. My name is Tobias Zun, and I will be the host for this event today. As you might know, the New Books in Daoist Studies series is part of of various online events that the Global Daoist Studies Forum organizes in about roughly every 2 months. So if this is something that interests you and that excites you, keep your eyes open and your ears open for new events. I think we're organizing, I think right now, the next one, it's not fully settled yet. And so we'll get some news about this very soon. And, you know, to be honest, I can say that we are all very excited to see that so many people have registered for this event, and hopefully people will still show up during this time. We might even have about 200 people coming. So this is it's really nice to see how our events slowly become bigger and bigger and apparently reach more and more people. Before we start, however, you know, I have a few announcements to make. First of all, you know, I would like to remind you that this event will be recorded and uploaded to the Global Daoist Studies Forum's website, which you can find, or the reference to the Global Daoist Studies Forum website you can find in the chat box in a minute. I will upload all of these informations once we have started and more people have shown up. In a few days, you may find in the recording on this website. Normally, we're relatively fast in this regard. So, you know, in a few days, if you missed something or so, when you make notes, don't worry about that. You can just go to this website and recheck basically what has been said about the books today. Second, you know, Harvard University Press was so kind and offered us a 20% discount on the 2 books that are presented today. So if you're interested in purchasing them, also please find that link later in the chat box. I inserted there in a few minutes. About the organization, how it will look like today. I mean, it will consist of 3 parts. We have 2 conversations, which will each of them will be about 30 to 35 minutes long, most likely. One about Vincent Gaussat's book and one about Richard Wang's book. And after this, we have a collective Q&A session where everybody in the audience can raise questions towards the 2 authors, or, you know, perhaps also to the interviewees if there is a question. In order to do so, please, there are 2 options. The first option is that you go down in the bottom, you see a tab that says reactions. You click on this one, and there's another tab that you can click on that says raise your hand. So this is one option, that you raise your hand. I will note that you have a question. We'll mark it in the sequence how they show up, and then ask you call upon you to ask your question during the Q&A. The other option is that you write out a question in the chat box, and I will check them too, and either read the question for you or call upon you to pose your question yourself. I will try my best to keep the order as they come in. If I make a mistake and somehow miss it, please be forgiving. That just can sometimes happen. And the last thing, you know, that I want to emphasize here is please double check that your microphone is muted. Also important is I didn't close the share button as far as I know on Zoom, so please don't press this one because this could cause some troubles. And yes, that's, I think, the last thing I have to say before introducing everybody else. I hope, you know, you all have a good time wherever you are in the world, and thank you for joining us today. So the first double header that we have, of the first part of the double header, is Vincent Gaussat and Elena Veloussi. Vincent Gaussat, I don't think needs a lot of introduction. Most of you know him, and I would perhaps say he's, in my opinion, the foremost historian of Chinese religions and Daoist studies of his generation. He teaches at the École Pratique des Hautes Études in Paris, and, you know, I mean, if you just look at all the books that he has published, it's quite amazing to see not just only his productivity, but also his voice on all these kind of different topics that are central for an understanding of the study of religion in relationship to China on one hand, and at the same time, overall, just like, you know, Daoist topics in the study of religion. His publication record includes such, I think, important contributions like the Daoist in Peking, 1800 to 1949, the religious question in modern China, which we, for example, had to read as grad students in Madison, and his recent work on the Heavenly Masters, the 2000 years of the Daoist state. So we're really happy that Vincent is joining us today, and we'll talk about his book. The second person in this case, the interviewer of Vincent, is Elena Valusi. If you're somebody who's joining the GDSF, you know her for sure. Elena is a senior lecturer in history at Loyola University, Chicago. She's probably the foremost expert on Nuidan, on female inner alchemy, that is in the United States and beyond, and has worked on important topics on Chinese gender, religious and intellectual history. And recently, she received, as part of a larger project, a big grant to map out the religious diversity in modern Sichuan project. And if you're interested in this Sichuan-related massive project, I also will provide the link in the chat box. So without further ado, I will hand over basically the entire thing to Vincent and Elena, and I wish you all a wonderful time.
Thank you, Tobias, and thank you to everyone who is here today. We're very excited about this event, and I am here to present Vincent's book. Vincent's book is this, Making the Gods Speak, and I have a lot of notes in this book. And so I read this book and I found it really impressive in many different ways. So what I'm going to do is to present the book and then ask Vincent a few questions so that we can best represent the scholarship in it. So this book brings together a variety of secondary scholarship existing on spirit writing, together with an impressive examination, interpretation, and categorization of the vast literature produced by spirit writing over the centuries, covering a period from the 10th to the 20th century, so a whole millennium. While the main focus of the book is spirit writing, one of the excellent contributions that the book has is that it positions spirit writing within the larger framework of the production of divine texts in China in general. And so the book revolves around the communication between gods and humans, or as Vincent terms it, a revelatory ecology. The fundamental question that permeates and leads this book's research relates to the different modalities of communication between humans and gods, and the question of divine presence and the relationship between humans and gods. So beyond spirit writing, actually Gossart also refers to an impressive amount of textual evidence from much earlier than the beginning of spirit writing, from the 3rd, 4th century AD. So detailing and attempting to categorize different modes of communication, creating a typology of revelation, and often emphasizing the intimate physical sensory experiences that permeate this relationship. And the large amount of examples that he provides really bring to the fore the incredible variety of ways of communication between humans and gods, as well as the innovation that emerge over such a long period of time, and revealing the commitment that through the centuries the Chinese have had towards this fundamental relationship with gods. The book makes several important interventions, such as, for example, bringing back the origins of spirit writing to Daoist rituals, shifting the focus of the agency a little bit away from lay actors who have been at the center of recent research towards initiated Daoists. However, at the same time, Gossart argues for an expansion of the notion of who is and was a Daoist and who could act as the intermediary between gods and humans. As I said, the larger Vincent positions the spirit writing within many modalities of interaction that can be oral, written, visual, dreams, and also he connects spirit writing to other cognate practices like divination, prophecy, spirit possession, shamanism, while at the same time trying to categorize all of this, which is a difficult task, to say the least. On the whole, I think this book is really valuable as it does start making sense of a multifaceted practice, long-standing, and a multifarious text production that has long been marginalized and understudied, but is in fact a fundamental element of Chinese religious life. So I'm going to start with a first question, and these questions are meant to open the conversation so that the topics discussed in the book can be a little more accessible to everybody. So this is my first question for Vincent. In this book, you bring back the origin and continued use of spirit writing to ritual, Daoist rituals specifically. You argue strongly that it started among an array of other techniques of communicating with the gods in a context in which ritual specialists were summoning the gods and exerting control over them. You stress the control procedures that allow initiated clerics to summon gods and order them to speak. And you argue against the focus, or maybe you push a little bit against the focus that has been mostly found in research in the late imperial period, that this technique was mostly used by lay Daoist groups in a secularized environment, which dispensed with clerical mediation. On the other hand, you highlight the importance of initiated ritual specialists at the origin of spirit writing. So one question is, who can you explain a little more who you think controls the revelation? And is it the ritual specialist who summons the god, or is it the god who has the urge to transmit important messages to humans? And you speak of degrees in this relationship, but I'd like you to talk a little bit more about human agency as opposed to divine power. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Elena. Before I try to answer this question, I would really like to begin by very warmly thanking all the wonderful group behind the Global Daoist Studies Forum for not only organizing, and Tobias, not only for organizing this session today, but for the whole forum in general. I think the Global Daoist Studies Forum has been one of the best things that happened to our whole field over the last few years. I mean, it's really a true pleasure each and every time, and I'm really honored to be here. And of course, extremely glad and honored to have my dear old friend Elena to have taken the time to read the book and to have said such nice words about it, and to have prepared these questions. I'm so very grateful. So who controls the revelation in the case of spirit writing? Well, as part of the answer is, of course, already in the question, in the case of spirit writing, and by contrast to other modes of revelation, and that's one of the things that my attempt at doing a typology of modes of revelation sort of is useful to put this into some sort of light and to understand this. In the kind of spirit, in the case of spirit writing, there is a shared agency, and a shared agency in an explicit way. I mean, in a way that is negotiated and shown to the audience. There is a dialogue between the spirit writers and the gods, and a bond between them. And the more I look at spirit written material, both, I mean, throughout the chronological arc from the earliest evidence, like 11th century, down to the very present, there's one of the red threads going through the whole millennium of spirit writing is the very strong bond between the members, the living disciples, the deeds of the gods, and the gods they are working with through spirit writing. And these bonds can be, bonds of discipleship and, and being trained and receiving instruction and teachings, but it also an affective bond. And there's a lot of not only discursive teachings going back and forth through the spread writing implements, but also a lot of affects, often expressed in terms of love, right? There's really something about building a persona and fulfilling persons, not only in terms of learning and training oneself and making spiritual progress, but also in fulfilling one's own need for love. I think that's the term. And therefore, to fully take account of this shared agency and the fact that this is spirit writing is something that is built by, that is elaborated, built by both humans and gods, I think we need to take gods as persons in this very same capacity as humans. If you don't mind, I'm going to briefly share my screen now to show you something which actually is not in the book, but something I've been doing since I published the book, which is sort of continuation of the book, and which is here on, and this is just one image. This is part of a paper which will be forthcoming very soon in the journal Religions, which is a free online access journal, which is a historical social network analysis of the relationship between gods and spread writing groups and between the gods themselves, right? So, and I'm going to comment too much on this because it will take time. But the idea is to look at gods as person and these divine person building themselves up as person in the process of spirit writing. The spirit writing altars is a space that is given for these divine entities to express themselves and subjectify themselves and speak for themselves and in the process building up themselves as persons. Okay. And you have smaller persons with a few connections and a few people, other gods and humans to talk to, and then you have bigger persons with a very large social network and with lots of connections and a very stronger personality. But all of those evolve. And the more spirit writing groups give space for these entities to speak for themselves, the bigger they grow as divine persona. Okay, stop share. So this is part of my answer to your question. The agency is shared because both the gods need the humans as well as in that particular spirit writing process, both parties need each other to constitute themselves as person and to grow as person. Yeah, I think I'll stop at that and give you time for more questions.
Great, thank you for that. And I will not comment on your answers because hopefully people will ask questions at the end about your answers. So I'm going to go to my second question, and so a fundamental question that permeates and leads this book's research relates to the different modalities of communication between humans and gods, and you've talked a little bit about that right now. And the question of divine presence. You go through an impressive amount of textual evidence creating a typology of revelation. At the same time, as you yourself acknowledge in the book, often these are ideal types and they don't, and in fact, these ideal types are not as distinct, but they exist on a continuum, they overlap, they merge, they appear, or they apply at the same time and are often difficult to define as distinct from each other. So, so my question is, can you discuss why you wanted to create this categorization that sometimes feels a little bit, it pulls you in different directions, and what challenges this categorization created for you?
Okay, thanks for this. if I may, second and last share screen moment, and that's just to share with everyone the actual typology, and that's from the book. Just that everyone knows what we are talking about. So beyond the undeniable fact that I just indulge myself in creating typologies all the time, I think they are useful to bring some sort of order to the sheer mass of revealed literature in the Chinese case. I mean, and which is already quite impressive by early modern times. And when you reach the late imperial and modern times, then you have masses of revealed text that circulate and are reprinted in all kinds of formats that are just mind-numbing. And so we need tools to just acknowledge the fact that these were created in different means, by different types of groups, through different techniques, and that the modes through which these revelations were produced as a relationship to the contents. This is not just a one-way exclusive connection between one mode of revelation and one type of content, but still there is a causal link between the two. And I don't think, even though of course these are ideal types and we need to look at the messiness of each particular case, so far, I think it holds water reasonably well. I mean, this typology is working its purpose more or less okay so far, as far as I'm concerned. And one of its usefulness is maybe that it prevents us from using blanket terms to qualify all of the different texts together. Like sometimes mediumistic is used to refer to all revelation, whereas in many cases with these were not actually not revelation produced by spirit mediums, but produced in other ways, in other contexts. So yeah, so as you can see from the table here on the screen, I use 3 criteria, which looks at both what the revealed texts say about themselves and what we might know from paratext appended to it or independent from it. I mean, stories, narratives relating how that particular revelation occurred. So one is whether we know about the circumstances, who, where, when. One is the presence of witnesses or their absence. I mean, the case of visualization, if the revelation happens in the inner space, in the mind of a particular practitioner, then obviously there are no witnesses. If it's spirit possession or spirit writing, one needs an audience in general. So this is extremely different if this revelation is performed for one person or for a group. That's the dynamic is extremely different. And then what for me might be the most crucial element, and something that was probably, I think, was less taken into consideration by scholarship so far, is the existence or lack of a known codified liturgical method for producing the revelation. And in some cases, like spirit writing, we have manuals explaining how to do spirit writing. That does not mean that each and every spirit writing seance follows exactly a scripted manual, but we have manual. It's been codified, and this codification has been, I mean, it reflects reality. It is not reality, but it's connected to reality. So, and for visualization as well, I mean, the kind of shunting revelations early on in the medieval period, we have the manuals that explain how to do it. Doesn't mean it's easy and everyone can do it, but it's been codified, right? And this is very different from encounter types revelation, when if you go to the mountains and practice asceticism, and then an immortal comes and tell you, you've worthy of revelation, I will give you instructions. We don't have codified manuals to explain how to do this exactly, and that, in my mind, that makes a major difference. Okay, so the combination of these 3 criteria results in this table with 5 main types of modes of revelation, and then within that there are subtypes and so on and so forth. But I think this this hopefully can work as a general framework to think about differences of how revelations are produced, and as a result, differences in the type of revealed text that are in the end put into either a restricted or open access circulation. And one last remark, just to try to answer your question, Elena, is that hopefully this kind of typology might serve a comparative purpose. I mean, these terms are not Chinese emic terms, and hopefully scholars working on revelations in other cultural areas, whether East Asia or elsewhere in Asia or elsewhere in the world, might find this useful to think about what exists in their own cultural area, and whether they might find this useful, or they might help refine or complexify or improve on this typology, and in turn make us understand what might be missing or might be absent in China, even though we have such a huge and variety of modes of revelation, and as a result, huge variety of types of revealed text. But maybe there are some types of revelation that exist elsewhere that does not exist in China. Right? So and conversely, so I really have had a comparative goal in mind when trying to devise this typology. Which was a challenge at the same time, in trying to phrase that in a way that speaks to scholars who don't work on the Chinese case. It's probably too early to say whether this will result in something or not. But yeah, hopefully this might be in the future be used in comparative discussions. Stop share. And
okay, great. Thank you for that answer. And maybe we'll go into this comparative mode or question a little bit more at the end if we have time. But right now I wanted to ask you another question more specific to spirit writing. So while you start by providing a larger background to the interaction between humans and gods and the transmission of messages through a variety of means and that you just described, then you turn to discussing spirit writing specifically in your book. And one of the major moments of transition that you describe happens in the late Ming, from spirit writing being used mostly for short commentaries and instructions about scriptures, to the production of specifically spirit-written scriptures, large scriptures, long scriptures. Can you comment on the change that this enacts in the larger landscape of religious literature in China and the theological innovations that it produces? And related to this, there's also a social change in the emergence of the Jitan, specifically an altar to receive spirit writing texts. And you describe it as a voluntary open group of educated people devoted to the double aim of self-cultivation and universal salvation. So I wanted you to speak a little more about this fundamental moment of change, both in terms of the texts themselves that are received, as well as the social network around the transmission of these texts.
Yeah, thank you. I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you once again by saying I don't have the definite answer or even a good preliminary answer to the why. What I've been trying to do in that particular chapter, called Late Ming Turn or something like that, in the book, and of course I didn't find this out. I mean, this has already been identified by other pioneering scholars. I'm thinking of the Lai Jitim, Chinese University of Hong Kong, and maybe a few others that really looked at this moment when spirit writing sort of accelerates and it grows much more visible, and we get documentation about all kinds of local spirit writing groups in different parts of the Chinese world, from the basically 1570s or so to the to the end of the Ming. But already being able to describe that phenomenon is probably a good first step, and then more rounded explanation of why this happened will probably need to wait a little bit further. But it's quite likely that in any case, we will need a multi-factor explanation for this phenomenon. And I would not a priori favor external versus internal explanation. By external, I mean the social context. Of course, it's a moment of booming literacy, social mobility, demand for books. Right? So many more people who can read and write books, who are willing to invest into the publication and of books, including religious books and including books from the gods, and many more educated people without employment in the civil service or otherwise, who are investing their time and energy into charities and all that kind of social reform, local organization, in work in close collaboration with the gods in order to bring moral and social order to society. And that's certainly part of the whole Jitan spirit writing altars movement. So that's sort of external explanation, and of course that's sort of a necessary condition. It's part of the story, but it's probably not the whole story. It's quite likely that the new techniques that were maybe easier to teach or to transmit made this rather sudden popularization of spirit writing possible. That's the moment when the term Ji, Fuji, the Ji, right, with the divination, Dan, the Bu, this term, which now is taken for the generic term for spirit writing, but it appears quite late. That appears during that period, mid-16th century. So it probably refers to a new technique or a simplified technique, which make it easier for many people to learn and practice it. Maybe yes, thank you. Sort of willingness of trained ritual specialists to train all kinds of disciples to practice it, sort of opening up of the tradition. This is also a factor, and there might be really internal and you said theological elements to it. One rather remarkable element is the cult of Lü Zu, but Patriarch Lü, the immortal Lü Dongbin, who becomes a really dominant god in the world of spirit writing during that period, and who was not involved with spirit writing earlier, as far as we know, or if he was, quite marginally. And unlike the kind of gods were dominant in the world of spirit writing before, I mean, the Song, Yuan, and early Ming periods, which were gods really associated with Daoist ritual traditions, like Wenchang or Zhenwu, or the various thunder gods. Lü Zu is not at the head of a ritual pantheon. So when Lü Zu starts to communicate with disciples through spirit writing, it's not to teach his own ritual method, it's to teach inner alchemy, and is sort of shifting from giving personal instruction to his human disciples in inner alchemy to universal. There is this call of universal salvation through alchemy, which incidentally happens about at the same time in the world of literary spread writing cults and in the world of the so-called sectarian movements, which are also trying to spread the practice of inner alchemy to save the whole of humanity within an eschatological framework, but with other revelatory methods. But anyway, we have maybe it's a sort of a response, elite literary response to the sectarian movements by also trying to teach through the voice of Lu Zhu, immortal Lu, inner alchemy to the whole of humanity through spread writing. And this is a theological innovation. At the same time, we also have Buddhist bodhisattvas coming from the Pure Lands to also teach salvation techniques to the whole of humanity through spread writings as well. So there's this kind of call for message of universal salvation transmitted through spread writing by the gods as a sort of most time-effective and cost-effective means of saving the whole of humanity. That's an internal element that may also explain the very rapid expansion of spread writing during that particular late Ming period. That said, it's an important turn. It completely changed the amount of spread writing literature we have by several orders of magnitude. But it's not a complete revolution either. I mean, many of the themes, the form of the spread writing groups that we see in late medieval times was already basically there earlier on in the Song Yuan period. The kind of relationships that the gods have with the humans remains more or less the same. The eschatological discourse remains quite stable, right? So there is strong continuity. What we see during this late Ming turn is a sort of opening up and embracing of spread writing groups as a way to have access to individual and collective salvation by all kinds of educated people. Right, so it's less a complete revolution within the tradition as a kind of opening up of the possibilities that were already there. Yeah. Great. So Taikao, we need much more work before we really understand what happened then.
Of course, and also you identify many other turns after the late Ming. I just identified this one, but in the book there are other chapters that identify turns, different turns in the late imperial period and the Republican period. So if you want to read about those turns, you can buy the book and read it. So if I
get dizzy with all of the terms, yeah.
That's right. So if I have, I think there may be an extra couple of minutes, Tobias, for my last question. Is that right or not? 5 minutes. Okay, perfect. So I have, and you've already addressed this a little bit, but I wanted to ask you more specifically. At the end of your book, you mentioned briefly the need for a comparative perspective, and that you hope that this book will create the possibility to compare this incredibly vast trove of material and your categorization to other areas of the world with revelatory traditions. And so can you expand a little bit on that in what you hope to see in this context?
Okay, yes, thank you. This is something that I don't really do in the book. I hope to say the first, not the last word, the first word about the Chinese revelatory traditions, and to make it maybe accessible to scholars working on different things, including revelations elsewhere. But I do not engage in the comparative exercise at all in the book. But I hope that especially the typology, the fivefold typology that we discussed a little bit before, will entice scholars working on other places to engage in a discussion and maybe find a sort of common platform which is not too much like Christian based or monotheism based, and it would give more room to the kinds of complex social networks of between humans and gods in the plural that we see in the Chinese case, but which is also something that we see in many other parts of the world. Just the few primary discussion that I've had with colleagues working on other traditions so far is that what may be peculiar, what at least to some colleagues appear as peculiar in the Chinese case, is the extent to which some, not all, but some of the modes of revelation, of the Chinese modes of revelation, are codified, and the liturgy, codified liturgies for making the God speak are actually known and now accessible. They were not necessarily always accessible. They were in some times. In some other cases, they were, transmitted from within priestly lineages or, initiatory lines and not accessible. But now, we have access to all of these documentation. So we have an actually important mass of the ritual codification explaining how to make these things happen, how to engage with dialogues with the gods. And in some other cultures, there does not seem to exist such a body of well-codified, well-scripted procedures for engaging in dialogues with the gods and obtaining instructions and revelations from them. And one obvious example is the Buddhist Mahayana traditions in India and in Central Asia, where we have this absolutely impressive, Mahayana Sutra revelations, which do not say anything about the way they were actually written and transmitted to humans, well, produced in this world. And I think that's a good starting point, a good entry point for a comparative discussion. How come that in some culture, like in a Chinese context, we have codification of how to make this work, and in some others we don't, even though both cultures have actually produced that kind of similar kinds of revelations.
Okay,
Thank you again,
great.
Elena.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Vincent. And I'm going to turn it, I'm going to pass it on to, I don't know if Tobias is going to speak or David. But thanks very much, Vincent. And I'm sure that people will have a lot of questions at the end.
Yeah, thank you so much. What we have now is basically like a turnover to a different book, also published by Harvard University Asia Center. So first of all, thank you, Elena and Vincent, for this insightful conversation. And I'm really looking forward to the second one that we have today. We will discuss Richard Wang's recently published book, Embedded in Temple Networks, Daoism and Local Society in Ming China. And let me say a few words about Richard. Richard is a professor of Chinese studies and religious studies at the University of Florida. And in my opinion, I think he is a pioneer when it comes down to the study of Taoism and literature during the Ming, something that is still understudied and needs more work on, despite the fact that there are some colleagues are dabbling more into this kind of area. He has contributed not only something about temple networks, but I think a really important book that he published was about the importance of Taoism for cultural elites during this period. Something that, I teach a course here at Reed that is on a Song dynasty that doesn't even include, for example, a Taoism section, and where people just assume that Taoism didn't really play a role for any kind of cultural elites. And I think, Richard does a really phenomenal job in putting the finger on this neo-Confucian wounds that is basically everywhere. And so I'm really excited that we have Richard coming here today and talking about his work in a conversation with David Musina, who is the author of Knotting the Banner, Ritual and Relationship in Daoist Practice, which was published with the University of Hawaii Press and the Chinese University of Hong Kong Press. If you are interested in knowing what David's book is about, David was actually one of the presenters at the first New Books in Daoist Studies. So there is a video of this entire event. So if you're online and you're goofing around trying to find some videos to look at, perhaps the GDSF might be a good starting point to learn more about his work. Largely, David researches living Taoism in Hunan province and its rooted in liturgical currents of the Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties. So he's an absolute expert to introduce and talk with Richard about his new book. So thank you so much for taking the time to prepare this. And I hand it over to David and Richard.
Great. Thank you, Tobias, very much for the introduction. And speak for Richard. Thank you. Okay, so I want to introduce Richard's book economically so we can discuss it. So Lineage is Embedded in Temple Networks. This book, fantastic cover, beautifully produced book by the Harvard Asia Center. Go out, get it now on the link. This book is the first monograph-length study in any language on Taoism and local society in the Ming Dynasty. It shows how one particularly well-placed Taoist lineage served as a kind of interface between local organizations, such as temple networks, local lineages, and the central state institutions. That well-placed lineage was that of the great Taoist cleric Liu Yuanran, who was born at the end of the Yuan period in 1351. Originally from southern Jiangxi, Liu was trained at a young age in Zhengyi Qingwei scriptures and thunder rites by the prominent Taoist Zhao Yizhen, whom Professor Schipper and others have written about. Liu gained such a reputation for performing efficacious rain ritual that Ming Taizu, the Hongwu emperor, gave him a position in a state temple in the capital Nanjing. Liu performed Jai and Jiao on behalf of the emperor in the capital and in Taoist centers across the realm, such as Wudangshan. The Yongle emperor, who reigned from 1403 to 1424, as you probably know, appointed Liu the highest ranking official in the central Taoist registry, the Dao Lu Si, which was charged with administering national Taoist affairs. Liu Yuanran continued his duties after the capital moved to Beijing in 1420 until he was exiled in 1422, first to the Celestial Master headquarters at Longhushan, and then all the way to Kunming in Yunnan. The Hongxi emperor, who reigned right after Yongle, summoned Liu Yuanran back to Beijing, where he was again put in charge of managing the Taoist affairs of the empire. In 1426, Liu was elevated to the rank of Grand Perfected, Dazhenren, equaling the rank of the Heavenly Master on Longhushan. Liu continued to work for emperors, 5 in all, until his death in Nanjing in 1432. Liu Yuanran trained more than 100 young Taoists in Qingwei scriptures and rituals. He then appointed his own disciples to key positions in central state ritual agencies in Nanjing and Beijing. For example, Liu's direct disciple, Zhao Yizhen, also rose through the ranks of the Central Taoist Registry and oversaw the final editing and printing the Zhengtong Daozan in the mid-1440s. From the two capitals, Liu's Qingwei lineage emanated outwards to various locales where it had outsized influence. Either Liu Yuanran or members of his Qingwei lineage pervaded key temples in Suzhou and Tianjin. As delegates to Longhushan, they directly mediated between the Heavenly Master's ordination rites and official orthodoxy sanctioned by the state. Their Qingwei lineage deeply penetrated Maoshan. For the Jiajing Emperor, they were instrumental in establishing a major temple to Zhenwu at Qiyunshan in present-day Anhui, which rivaled the center of the Zhenwu cult at Wudangshan, patronized by Yongle. This project remapped the religious landscape of the empire during the mid-Ming. In the hinterlands, Liu's Qingwei lineage was transmitted among local Jingming Dao lineages in Jiangxi and on the military frontier in Yunnan. Liu's Qingwei lineage was so pervasive, its patriarchs were even subsumed into Quanzhen lineages, even though Liu and his lineage seem to have had nothing to do with Quanzhen. With incredible detail, the book shows in all these cases how the Liu Yuanran Qingwei lineage was literally embedded in local temple networks and festivals, from major urban centers to prestigious Daoist mountains to small towns and villages in the hinterlands. Liu's Qingwei lineage then served as an interface that mediated between temple and lineage organizations in local societies on the one hand, and central state institutions on the other. That mediation brought meaning and legitimation to both local society and the state. This was, as the book states, the real function of Taoism in local society. So that is what the book does. Right? So my first question for Richard is how you came to the structure of the book. The book argues that Liu Yuanran and his Qingwei lineage was a kind of central thread that runs through all of Ming Taoism. So I'm curious as to what initially gave you the idea to structure the book around Liu and his Qingwei lineage. I mean, those of us who study late imperial Taoism know Liu Yuanran, one of the few Taoists to be looked upon favorably by sort of official histories. But when I'm curious, but we didn't know, at least I didn't know, that his lineage was this pervasive. So I'm wondering how, if you can tell us how you came to see this lineage as a kind of linchpin for understanding sort of much of Ming Taoism.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for GDSF for presenting my book here, and especially together with Wang San. Also, thank you, David, for your careful reading. This is a good question. Actually, I'm a Ming study person, and I wanted to study. I wanted to study Ming Taoism, especially Jingming Taoism, long time ago. And from the Jingming lineage, we know Liu Yuanran was the sixth patriarch of that lineage. So I start very early on, maybe 20 years ago. I was looking for Liu Yuanran and any sources relate to him. But eventually, to my surprise, his ties with Quanzhen and Jingming turned out to be just claims. There wasn't nothing I can verify. But at the same time, then I stopped that. When I worked my first book, the Ming Prince of Dao and Taoism. In that book project, I encountered, used many local gazetteers. I encountered many local Taoism in many different regions, different areas, and it turned out that at the local level, I did find something related to Liu Yuanran, and eventually, as I showed in my book, but Liu Yuanran was a Qingwei master, and as David, you nicely put it, he was the most important disciple of Zhao Yizhen. So put all those scattered sources, materials together, then I realized that Liu Yuanran, in addition to Nanjing and Beijing, Liu Liu Yuanran and his disciples spread to many different places. Let me relate to this. Tobias, can I show a PowerPoint? I just made a PowerPoint. Okay, let me.
When you go down to share screen,
Yeah. Okay.
they should be able to.
Yeah. So. Slideshow. Do you see it? Yeah.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a Liu Yuanran. That's an image of Liu Yuanran, and the next image is this is the expansion road of the Liu Yuanran lineage. So basically, I realized from he's from Jiangxi, then from Jiangxi he all the way to Nanjing, then Beijing, then from the Nanjing to Beijing, we can see he and his disciples spread his lineage to many places. So in that sense, I think I want after the publication of my previous book, the Ming Prince of Daoism, about the relationship of Daoism and the elite of the elite, I want to say something about Ming Daoism in its local form, in local society. So but also, of course, this is very challenging because the Ming Empire was huge, and we all know that in China, the regional differences is huge. So how can I manage to present that kind of study in a coherent book? So then I realized the Liu Yuanran's lineage. I can use Liu Yuanran's lineage as a thread, as a thread to tie all those areas together. So that's why I use the Liu Yuanran lineage as a central thread and a central theme to cover different regions, different lineage of Fa Pai, right? Quanzhen and Jingming and Qingwei and the Longhushan, and so and the interaction between his lineage of priests as elite Daoists and the local society, including the local biological lineage of Zongzu. So I think I should stop here.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly effective construct, looking at sort of local and elite, the relationship between local and elite sort of Taoist practice, and through a lineage that connect. It's incredibly smart. So what this construct allows the reader to see when you read the book, you'll find, is just how nuanced then Richard's able to get each of these many test cases in which this Qingwei lineage or Liu Yuanran himself then sort of affected or permeated then these sorts of nodes in local society. And then Richard offers a few theoretical lenses sort of that help us nuance the different ways in which Liu's Qingwei lineage managed to become so widespread and influential, both with elites and then with local temple networks and local lineages. So on the one hand, the book shows that in some places, the lineage was demonstrably transmitted. That's to say that Liu himself or his descendants in the lineage actually went to a particular place or region, transmitted texts, taught the rites, which were Qingwei. In other places, the spread of the lineage is more murky, complicated, and Richard calls this stipulated transmission. He alluded to this in the context of Jingming Dao a moment ago, but I think it merits revisit. Stipulated transmission is that Liu's teachings on lineage genealogy were reconstructed or adopted, or there's mention of him and his disciples in ritual texts or rituals without direct proof of the presence there. Right? But also then affected a kind of influence then of this Qingwei lineage on local society. So because the book is so incredibly rich, I'm wondering if I can ask Richard here to maybe give a sort of example, kind of bounded example, a thick description, if you will, of a case of demonstrable transmission, and then maybe more on a case of stipulated transmission, just to give us a flavor here of the richness that Richard was able to sort of kind of coax out of his sources.
Okay, thank you, David. Yes, I actually my 4 case or maybe 5 cases in my book are about the demonstrate the transmission, but in my maybe except Jiangxi, okay, Jiangxi case. So one example of the demonstrated transmission of Liu Yuanren lineage is from Tianjin, the Tianfei Gong, the present day known as Tianhou Gong. So the Tianfei Gong patriarch, founding patriarch Li Desheng actually was a 4th generation disciple of Shao Yuzhen, and this Tianjin Tianfei Gong lineage used a lineage poem starting from Shao Yuzhen, but rather starting from Liu Yuanren. They trace back to Zhao Yuzhen. So they stick their farming, the original names to this lineage poem to show their identity, and this lineage was very successful, and they had a very clear sense, the self-identity of Liu Yuanren's lineage, and not only they were active locally, and because Li Desheng himself actually was dispatched from Beijing to Tianjin, and not only that, but also as David you just summarized, and Li Desheng took his disciples to Qiyunshan to for the mission of praying for ear for the Jiajing emperor. So this is, I think, is a good example of demonstrated transmission. Well, for stipulated transmission, several cases. One is the so-called Jingming Dao in Jiangxi. Yeah, we all know in Jingming history, Liu Yuanren, Zhao Yizhen was the 5th, and Liu Yuanren was 6th patriarchs. But actually, that's reconstructed, and we don't see. I don't see any direct relation between Liu Yuanren and Jingming. But this is reconstructed by Shao Yuzhen, Liu Yuanren's disciple, to buttress his image as a leader of Daoism. Also, in my concluding chapter, I show many cases. Actually, for example, in Huguang, in the area of Huguang, today's Hunan and Hubei. So many ritual texts list Liu Yuanren as a patriarch, and in their in their list invitation, the list of invitation of the patriarchs and ancestors, his name is always invoked. So that means he is important, and the local Daoists in this area recognize him as a Qingwei master. But beyond, aside from this, I don't see, at least so far, I don't see, I don't have any direct evidence that he was there. So this kind of cases show that I use the term stipulated the transmission to borrow the term of Friedman's term about the demonstrated lineage and the stipulated lineage. Thanks, David.
Yeah. So, yeah, this sort of really, such a concentrated study on the notion of lineage then raises a kind of methodological issue for those of us who work on these local levels, which is, how do we work on the level of lineage? And so when you read the book, you'll see the book employs just really an incredible array, different kinds of sources: canonical texts, gazetteers, stellae, genealogies, literary works, non-canonical ritual manuals and hagiographies, many of which were recently collated by Li Fengmao, personal interviews, and more. It's really amazing, right? But in particular, this book dealing with lineages, and also your previous articles, especially the ones in Chinese, get a lot of mileage from tracking down and comparing lineage poems, right? The poems that are used then to sort of trace the generations of members. So can you say more about the benefits and the challenges of working with lineage poems? Especially since there's so many versions and those characters get changed then with different homophones and dialects. Lineage poems are not easy to deal with. How did you go about doing that? You share something.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this is a very good question, and I think in terms of challenge, I think. First thing you should do is what I did is I collect as many sources of lineage in the lineage poems as possible, and of course there are several source books, right? But so one challenge is how to verify the claims of the early generations. Yeah, this is not just the problem of the Daoist lineage, but also it's a problem of any biological lineage, 宗族, right? The early ancestor, early generation it's always very difficult to verify. So I think one should be very cautious about that kind of claim. But leaving aside that kind of claim of the early ancestors, at least the lineage poems show the identity, the Daoist priests' identity, their rights, property, inheritance, ritual knowledge, ritual monopoly, etc. Right? So this is important for, of course, it's directly related to their farming, right? So it is extremely important for Daoist priests themselves. Another challenge is how to compare different versions of the same lineage poem. It's related to many homophone and also the dialects, right? And another tricky thing is similar lines of different lineage poems. I mean, so I see this as kind of, if we have not just one line, but a significant borrowing of one lineage poem from another lineage poem, probably that shows the liturgical affiliation or Fa affiliation. But this is we should be very cautious and very careful comparing this. So don't rush to the conclusion.
Yeah, thanks for that. Maybe we have about 5 minutes left, Tobias. Okay. Let's zoom out a bit here from the kind of the kind of thick sort of description that the book offers, and it's kind of as a kind of model for how to deal with different kinds of sources like lineage poems. But to zoom out and sort of ask what this book does in the larger field. Towards the end of the book, there's a passage that caught my eye. And the passage goes, this lineage expansion that Richard showed a moment ago on the screen of this Qingwei lineage, this lineage expansion route and network have not been known to academia due in part to some misconceptions. So I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit of what some of those misconceptions are. In other words, how does reading through the cases that this book offers correct the scholarly record about Ming Daoism?
Okay, yes, thank you. This is a very, very good, good observation and a very good question. And I think the misconception, I think the most common error many have made is to mistake Liu Yuanran and his linear priests as Quanzhen. And as a result, as I show, actually, Liu Yuanran and his disciple had nothing to do with Quanzhen. But still today, scholars claim he is a Quanzhen, patriarch. As a result, scholars have misidentified Daoist priests or temples associated with Liu Yuanran and his disciples as Quanzhen, as in the case of the 19th century Daoist scholar Chen Minggui, and many modern scholars scholarly works have focused on Quanzhen Daoism. I caution against any attempts to impose Quanzhen ties to Liu Yuanran, on Liu Yuanran and his disciples, no matter where they are encountered. The expansion route of Liu Yuanran Qingwei lineage does contain some cases of the lineage changing hands. The chapter 8 of my book is a typical example about the Xu Ning'an in Kunming. So whether misconceptions, false claims, deliberate strategies, or real lineage shifts, these transformations all moved in one direction, a change from the Liu Yuanran Qingwei lineage to the Longmen lineage of Quanzhen. So this change, authentic or otherwise, was in accordance with late Ming and early Qing Longmen fashion in Monica Esposito's words, or the 19th century trend in South China, and that reconstructs the Longmen lineage of Quanzhen Daoism. I think because part of the reason is because Quanzhen was considered the elite practice of Daoism. So scholars, elite Daoists, they favor Quanzhen. So this is a problem for us. It's in reality, in the Ming, at least in the Ming, it's not the case.
Okay, Tobias, how are we doing? We have.
I think you have another like 5 to 10 minutes. So you can ask
Okay.
one question.
Okay. All right. So this is a related question, kind of thinking along the end of Vincent's discussion here about implications of the work. So towards the end of the book, again, the book Richard writes, the examination of Liu Yuanran and his lineage, however, opens the lid of a Pandora's box of Ming Daoism, filled with questions that await further investigation and answers. Such questions go well beyond the scope of this book, but they suggest directions of research that might be fruitful. So I'm wondering if you can say a thing or two about, what some of those questions might be here that this book sort of acts as a springboard towards. I mean, what do you have in mind here?
Okay. I think, yeah, thank you for asking this question, because certainly there are several issues I'm not able to do in my book. One case is regarding the Qingwei transmission. We all know from the Yuan and the early Ming time, we know that Qingwei school had two main branches. One is in the south, one is with Wudangshan. The south is in Jiangxi, one is in Wudangshan, and basically the Jiangxi tradition was later inherited by Zhao Yizheng, then Liu Yuanran. Okay, so a Daoist ritual text hand copied in the early Qing and including Liu Yuanran in its invocation list of the deified patriarchs is derived from Jingzhou, Huguang, today's Hubei, right? As I have laid out elsewhere, the dominant Daoist tradition and the major Daoist temple in Jingzhou during the Ming were Qingwei. And in addition, the Jingzhou Daoist tradition was closely connected with the Wudangshan Qingwei lineage. So Liu Yuanran himself once made a pilgrimage to Wudangshan on Ming Taizu's behalf, and further in 1428, he or somebody representing him presented a report to Zhengwu at Wudangshan. Thus, we can see that Liu Yuanran, the Liu Yuanran lineage pervaded Jingzhou. Would it be possible for there to have been a direct exchange and contact between the Liu Yuanran lineage and the Wudangshan Qingwei lineage, the two main branches of Qingwei school in the late Yuan and early Ming? So this is, I think, it's interesting case for the study of a Qingwei tradition. Furthermore, were the other court Daoist priests active at the Ming court, having been acting on behalf of the Heavenly Master? In other words, should we consider these court clerics in the context of, in Wang Sang's words, the Heavenly Master institutions delegation mechanism in the Ming? In addition to Liu Yuanran, the high-profile Jiajing era Shao Yuanjie can also be understood in this way. If this is the case, then the religion and the state issue in the Ming would have a consistent pattern. Another thing is, after the mid-15th and the early 16th century, we must regard the different Quanzheng lineage as branches of that order. Even more so if we deal with the loosely organized Zhengyi order in the study of Ming Daoism. Not only were many textual and liturgical schools, such as Qingwei, Jingming, and Shenxiao, under the umbrella of Zhengyi, known for their liturgical method, Fa or Daofa, but many lineages arose from the same school, such as Qingwei, found within various internal works on Daoist lineage genealogies. These texts, at least, there exist at least 17 Qingwei lineage poems, some of which are traceable to the Ming. Even within Liu Yuanran's own Qingwei lineage, further divisions or further localization is attested to. So in the case of the Liu Yuanran lineage, most of these localized sublineages had their temporal basis from which we can comfortably discern these mass disciple genealogy and the localization processes. So these temples as an how can I say, as an embodiment, define the legal and the property rights of these lineages in local society. It is from these local communities that Daoist lineage and their Daoist liturgical framework play a significant role in structuring Daoism and society. And finally, this approach would contribute to the study of Ming history. For example, to some peripheral regions incorporated into the Chinese Empire and civilization later than the hinterland, this Daoist intrusion into local culture was more apparent. The integration of these peripheries into the Ming Empire was the first through the spread of the written text by the Daoist tradition with its universal cosmology and the sense of a central state, 中国. This textual tradition and cosmology then paved the way for the later introduction of Neo-Confucianism as a new orthodoxy. In our description and the interpretation of the state-making and empire building of the Ming, Daoism as a cultural force should not be neglected. Before Neo-Confucianism was considered orthodox, it was Daoism that served as the orthodox ideology to support the unified cosmology and a centralized state. Of course, this kind of study of Daoism would contribute to the study of Ming institutional history. I skip here. And finally, I think it's a special case is the Ming-Qing economic history is a specialized and robust subdiscipline in the field of Chinese history. The study of the Ming land system consists of mainly of consideration of land in terms of the category in tax records. For example, the private land, official land, land belonging to a princely estate, or land of a military colony. Insofar as Ming history is concerned, however, temple estates constitute another important component of general farmland. So, because some temples enjoy tax exemptions, the importance of temple estates is not visible in tax records. In reality, especially in locality in which temples were concentrated, temple estates were significant to the state, the local community, and the temple itself. So the temple land studied by Japanese and Chinese scholars is mostly Buddhist monastic endowments in the Ming. Nobody, however, has examined those temple endowments. So I think I just start in my book. I started a little bit in the case of Maoshan. I think we have a long way to go. I think I stop here.
Okay. Thank you very much, Richard, for providing dissertation topics for hopefully future scholars and those of us who work in this period to think with, ideas to think with, questions to think with. So everyone, Richard Wang, thank you very much.
Thank you, David.